we've identified where we can make this impact very quickly, because with the help of AI and other systems that we use, instead of going in and doing like a 30 to 60 day audit and then figuring out where the cracks are and helping companies, we're able to do that in a third of the amount of time, even less. When I came in to do a job, and let's say I was put in as the GM or the VP of sales, for instance, I always used to make it a point early on to make everyone aware that, hey, listen, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to sell a lot of damn product, and I'm going to help you and show you the way. After 3 to 4 years, 5 or 6 years, and a certain level of revenue, 70% of your revenue should come from your existing base. It's just like a business, right? Your business is never actually maintaining. It's either expanding or it's contracting. Looking at your customer base is the exact same way. If it's not expanding, it's contracting, right?
I could have spent 2 hours speaking with Rob. I felt like I was just getting decades of wisdom being crunched into the less than 30 minutes that I had with him. But I want to really kind of draw on a key aspect of why this interview with Rob is so valuable. And I almost invite you to listen to it twice. I know I have. And the key part that is this: you want to figure out who's there along for the journey with you for you to succeed as a founder, as an entrepreneur in whatever business that you're going and running. And what I really, really like that Rob kind of alluded to is have somebody who has kind of seen the signals. And it's not how the business operates, but it's how you operate. And there's so much good wisdom that is in this session. I invite you to go and really dive in, listen, reach out to Rob or myself. Rob can help you along this journey. We're happy to help you along this journey. But ultimately, tag him, hit him up, acknowledge just the wisdom and generosity that he put into this session today. And, what did I get as a big takeaway from this one? Focus on a repeatable process. While sales is exciting and the thrill of the hunt is there, you don't have a business without a customer. And I love how Rob just kind of reiterated that. And that closing statement from him, everything in life is about you. And yes, we know about this. It seems kind of so native. But why do you want to go and be listening to Rob? Because damn, that's some good wisdom.
Welcome to Raise and Exit, the podcast that is focused on founders and entrepreneurs going and getting insights from people who have gone and done it, people who are cutting the checks, or people who have insights into getting a competitive advantage to going and building their business in a way that might be missed in the general AI content that you might go and find on the 101 steps to build a company. And it is exactly in that domain that we have a very different individual on today's podcast who's going to kind of share with you what it takes to actually go and execute on a great idea. So with that in mind, Rob Gibbons, thank you for going and joining with us. Please give us a quick introduction and maybe take a little bit longer, because you're not somebody who's been going and doing this for 25 years with this company or been running a fund for 8. You're not even at day 60. So tell me a little bit about Achiever Capital and what you saw that is so critical for companies to go and take advantage of your offering.
Good to see you again, Edgar. Thanks for having me. So I think one of the things that drove me to it, and my partner and I, and we have actually there's 2 or 3 of us, that we just saw that the opportunity to do what we were doing at other companies together, and we wanted to give it a shot doing it on our own. The gentleman that I formed the company with, Juan Gonzalez, we've been now, I think we've worked at probably 5 or 6 companies together. 2 of those we exited. And it got to the point where we saw the need, and we had the system to be able to fix what people needed. So we identified what people were going through. I think we found a soft spot in anywhere from 10 to 15 million, under 80 million, that kind of thing, where there's a product market fit. And we have the systems in place. We each bring a different level of expertise. It's myself, Juan, and we have a colleague of ours, Tara, that does all our marketing, and another gentleman who does our reporting. But each of us possesses that skill set that the other one is complementary of. So whereas I'm sales and marketing execution, Juan is strategy, operations, retention. Our other gentleman is all the data, and Tara is all the marketing. And what the exciting part about doing it like it is now is that we've identified where we can make this impact very quickly, because with the help of AI and other systems that we use, instead of going in and doing like a 30 to 60 day audit and then figuring out where the cracks are and helping companies, we're able to do that in a third of the amount of time, even less, with our own software and with software that we partnered up with to find out where we think the cracks are, because we know what we're looking for. And the data only quantifies that. And then we have the systems that we put into action. And usually we've seen very good results from that. And now in day 60, like you said, we're doing it on our own. And we're blessed to say that, our Rolodex has been quite generous to us and we're quite busy just in the short period of time that we've been out in the market.
Rob, I love that you've and your partners have kind of gone and seen what is a recurring challenge for companies as they go through their scaling process, which is that sometimes things don't always work out. And one of the things that I kind of noticed is that we typically hear about all the big success stories that are out there. Oh, I went and started this, 9 years ago, we went and achieved this. Now we're running $400 million in revenue. And it just seems all of these like wonderful, like romanticized success stories that are there. And I love listening to them. I get great ideas. But I think what you're going and pointing to is that what do you do when you're not going and hitting your growth targets? Or what do you go and do when you've stalled in that product market fit that's there? And in that range that you're talking about, in that $10 to $80 million company range, that's where a lot of that scaling value is coming from.
That's right.
I'd love to kind of get a sense from you also, what is it that is there as a clue that founders should be looking for as a sign that they're actually going to be going and stalling? And maybe go beyond the typical numbers of like ARR growth declining or GRR or NRR kind of flooring. What is it that is another kind of signal for you from your professional background that you can share for a founder they should see?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll tackle the first part. So probably the biggest reason that we got into it, or I got into it personally, was that when I had developed a skill set that I could teach and train and recruit salespeople and sales systems and turn them around fast, I got a reputation for being that guy that could do that on a short timeline. And then I met Juan and he did the retention side. But it was interesting. Early in our careers, we weren't getting the calls from companies or colleagues or former colleagues saying, hey, we just knocked down our third quarter in a row. Rumor is we're going to IPO. You guys need to come over here and join in the celebration. We never really got those calls. We used to get the calls saying, hey, we just missed our second quarter in a row. Private equity is breathing down our neck. And if we don't turn this thing around fast, we're all gone. That's usually the call that we get, that kind of distressed bat signal call. And out of that, develop this skill set to where you need to make decisions fast and go with what you know works. And I think touch on the other part of your question is that, and I really want to make sure I hone on this, is that there's some of it that's intuition, granted, but more of it is experience that I've had in the field. And that being said, when I see founders who are companies that are founder-led, for instance, this is not a red flag for me, but more often than not, when they get to a certain level of scale, that part of the business that they intimately know how to run is either ready to scale or it's at a precipice to where they need to bring in other help. And it's tough for them to admit. It's even tougher for them to sign on other people like you, like myself, that can say, okay, take over the reins because this is someone's baby. This is someone's company. But more often than not, I spot these pretty quickly in the sense that when we dive a little bit below, like, okay, how many people do you have doing this or who's doing this? And it's usually, oh, Jane's doing that. Oh, well, who's doing your outbound marketing? Oh, that's Phil. When it's this one person who's wearing many hats, they've been fortunate enough to get to the level of revenue they have. But now that doesn't scale. And what I always, the hard line I take with founders sometimes is saying, hey, listen, if you're really so confident in this business that you built, if you stepped away for 2 weeks, would it crumble? And it's a confronting moment because a lot of them are like, no, of course not. Jim would run it. But then they think to themselves, just by the time we've been sitting on the conversation for 25, 30 minutes, their phone has been buzzing and going off the whole time. And they're putting out a fire. If they stepped away, the thing would probably crumble in 2 weeks is giving it time. So where we come in is those people that are ready to say, okay, I've taken this as far as I can. Now it's time to trust people that have the experience where they've done this before and have shown that, hey, listen, if you've got a great product market fit and you've already built an amazing business, but you've gotten to that point where you need help to get it to the next level, then that's usually where we really fall into our sweet spot. Now, I'm not trying to say that it's all been roses because, you mentioned failure early. I've failed certainly a lot more times than I've succeeded, to be quite frank with you, but that's also been probably the best education that I've had because I've been fortunate where I've manufactured, forcing myself to learn from those mistakes.
Rob, I love what you went and said that you failed more often than succeeded because, and I'm going to go and pull your background into this, Rob. So it's this like one thing that you don't hear or see about Rob is how tall he is.
That's right.
And he's pushing 7 feet. So I'm going to go and put one of my favorite kind of like sports quotes that I had, which was kind of like a summary of Michael Jordan, who was just, I grew up in his era.
Same here,
And and it was around how many shots he had missed.
Yeah, I've stayed.
Right,
I've missed
everybody
over
goes
1,000
and
shots.
like
Yeah.
appreciate it, like he's won 6 champions, etc., but he'd missed more shots than anybody else.
Yeah.
Like all of these different numbers that he went and shot out there. And I think what you're kind of pointing to is an understated, and I think it is the necessary component of running a business, which is what should go and do when things aren't going the way that you're
That's
looking for.
Yeah.
And I think we get out of like the excitement and the romanticism of going and getting that early customer base.
Yep.
And I think the struggle for why there's so many companies don't make it in that romanticized ideal is because they do hit that stall moment that is there. So I want to kind of take things through off of that analogy of basketball and actually bring it back to when you are there as the founder and at the stage of company that you're working with, $10 to $80 million, you're no longer a single person company with 75 AI agents running things around you.
Right.
The question that becomes is, how do you handle that aspect of the team? So what would you say is that advantage of having been an athlete, being on a tight-knit basketball team on so many occasions? What is something that you can learn from team sports that you'd want to bring in to when things are hard?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm fortunate to where I do have that team sports background at a very, very high level. Don't get me wrong. God blessed me with height, but on the talent scale, just above a turtle. But I was fortunate enough to be groomed and coached by some of the most brilliant basketball minds in the game at the time. And on top of that, I come from also a military dad, old school, brilliant engineer who was very disciplined, very structured. I think when you get into a company, what the mistake I used to make, to be completely transparent with you, Edgar, was that when I came in to do a job, and let's say I was put in as the GM or the VP of sales, for instance, I always used to make it a point early on to make everyone aware that, hey, listen, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to sell a lot of damn product, and I'm going to help you and show you the way. And I had a tough time because there's immediate resistance when you come and take that angle. And where I changed things up for myself was that I started making a point to be the same before I could be different. So I started looking at what was, instead of going in and saying, hey, you guys are not making numbers, here's my system, let's all do it. If you don't do it, find the door, that kind of thing. That automatically creates a massive we they, right? And there's we theys in every culture, right? Especially in sports. The we they was, at practice, it was the team against the coaches. And then you went on the road and it was you and the coaches versus the other opponent and all their fans. We theys are okay, but when they start out immediately as kind of pushback in a sales culture, for instance, or business, they don't always produce the best results and you're fighting up a battle. So what I made it a point is to be the same before I can be different. So what I've done is when I go into a sales institution as a CRO and such, I try to say, okay, where are you stuck? Where are the deals that are on the fence that have been jammed up for a while? Let's dissect those, or let's go into those personally with you. And I basically make sure that I'm just a fly on the wall before I try to tweak anything, because I've got to get an idea of what good looks like. Now, where the athletic background really helps, and I personally, I'm almost biased because when I hire people, especially salespeople, I usually tend to look for an athletic background because I know these people have faced adversity. And, it's interesting because entrepreneur, I wouldn't call myself an entrepreneur by any sense of means because I'm not that creative. But I can tell you that the stress level that you go through as a high-level athlete is nearly identical to the stress level that you are in business. And I believe also that the things we go through strengthen us, but also form a callus or a scar, if you will, that we can do it again. And, people always talk about the sexiness of being an entrepreneur. Like you said, we scaled it to 400 million and things like that. I bond with people more often when I tell them about, the startup that I failed, that I put 3 years of my life into, that I cleaned out my savings, my wife's savings, had to borrow money from her dad and had to literally start back from nothing. Those are the types of stories that really make you what you are. And it's like that in athletics. You don't really remember the games that, it's not just running out in front of the crowd or anything else. It's the time you spent in the locker room, on the road, in the gym where there was 10,000 people screaming at you that hate you, things like that. But then I will say this, winning at any level always stays with a person. And what I found fortunate for me was that I was very fortunate in college that we won a lot. We won 4 championships in college. I know that's been probably the single biggest catalyst for me to even be sitting where I am, because I'm not afraid of the odds. I'm not afraid to mess things up or to admit that I've made a mistake and, okay, I'll figure out a way to fix it and go on. People talk about how great it is, we scale this and scale this. I wish people talked more about, one of my personal times was I had started a medical device company and it was starting to get to that point where it was positive. but I had 9 guys working for me. And I remember laying in bed next to my pregnant wife of 8 months pregnant. And she used to do like the house bills and everything. And that night I had gotten paid by the company, and there was only like a couple $100 for us to last the next 2 weeks after I had paid out my team.
Yeah.
There's not enough people that talk about that. That's real stress, right? It's just like going in the athletic world, when you're at the foul line or the game is on the line, it's very similar, right?
I want to pick up on that aspect of it, because this to me is something that, as an entrepreneur myself and what I go and do, it is those conversations that are there. And sometimes they are just conversations with yourself. So what would you say as somebody who works with founders, works with entrepreneurial teams, and kind of getting them through that rut? What's that self-signal that you encourage people to look for? How can you kind of check in with yourself that you're not too far across the precipice, but you can kind of see the canyon coming? What are some things that you've kind of gone and learned from your own startups, from your own companies that you've launched, and now going and solving for what to me is almost like saving companies from the type of things that kind of bring them down?
Yeah, it's a couple things. I mean, the most basic level, if I'm working with heads of sales or anything, and I say to them, a lot of times they have decision paralysis because they overthink things. They've had 1 or 2 things go wrong. And what happens is psychologically, people marry themselves to that negative outcome, and they kind of core their own story around that. And it gives them kind of decision paralysis. One of the things that, and I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I never lament over things too much, too often, because there's too many people that are dependent upon me making decisions. So when I work with founders, I say, okay, at the very start of things, and this is the case with heads of sales as well, if you had to list all the, if everything went south right now, right, today, if they said, hey, we've got to close the doors, sit down, take 5 minutes and write down the worst things that would happen to you. Like what would happen? Because let's be honest, you're not going to die. You know what I mean? They're not going to put you in handcuffs and walk you out of the building. You're not losing your car. Your wife is still going to find you somewhat appealing, hopefully, you know? So like when you get to that granular level about what's the worst that could happen, it's really getting to a point where you can nullify people's fear of making decisions. Because a lot of times what happens, I noticed that when founders get into a certain groove, like we mentioned this earlier, a lot of these companies, especially tech companies now, the founder CEOs are usually engineer types because they're the product heads, they're brilliant. And you find that their early part of their audience, their customer base, or even their money comes from the friends and family, the ecosystems that they used to run in, the circles that used to be a part of, fellow engineers, colleagues. They've got a new product, it solves a problem. Hey, I know Edgar, I trust them, and they buy it. And then they start to scale. And what they don't do is they focus so much on product and certain things in the market where they don't build out a repeatable system, a culture where they can say, hey, now we need to see how we sell this against competitors and such. It's still that like level of sexiness. Around the time they go for like a Series B, when they're ready to pour in capital and scale, they realize, wow, we don't really have a culture. We don't have an infrastructure where it can be repeatable. Because a lot of these guys make the same mistake. They hire a couple high-price enterprise guys that bounce from company to company. They give them the playbook and they go out and sell it. But really, those guys, they're usually more damaged than they are good because they're just hitting the quick wins, right? They're not really establishing the repetitive nature that you need to with these companies. Like, okay, you can get people through the door, but how are you retaining them? How are you making and maximizing the most of their experience so they stay a customer? A lot of times when you ask these new founders, and I find this a lot often lately, they say, okay, what's your growth rate? And they tell you, I say, okay, what's your GRR, NRR? Okay, what's your retention level? And they're like, well, at the second you get a vague answer around that, you know that there's holes in the boat.
You've touched upon, Rob, which to me is probably one of my biggest signals that I run into professionally. In companies that have reached a certain set of maturity and they want to be able to go and sustain it. And what that is that customer retention figure that is
100%.
There. And what kind of comes to me around that is that, look, you went through some great efforts to be able to go and acquire a customer. And there's either two things that happened. One, you stopped servicing them.
Correct.
Or two, you went and essentially got them. Right. And you're pointing to that, those enterprise sales folks that are coming in. One of the things that I've seen working with a lot of companies in the range that you serve is that they burn the market to get to the revenue that they have. And that is a cycle that kind of cascades. And if you're lucky, you have a gargantuan market that you're able to go and get to critical mass and, be able to convince other people. But I'm seeing on the due diligence side of organizations that people are going and looking at, is there another $80 million left for this company?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that is one of the biggest gaps that I'm seeing, is that people don't understand where their next revenue is going to come from. What's that next domino that needs to fall?
Right.
So can you provide a little bit of perspective, kind of looking at that failure data that you've been exposed to? What is another sign of failure risk that a founder should be looking for, or maybe should be encouraging their team to be on the lookout for?
Yeah. It's a great question. It's part of the reasons why I'm partners with the gentleman that I am. My colleague Juan is, when we got into a company that we had a basically short timeline to help turn around, I had never really been that aware or that into customer success. And he's one of the guys that wrote the book on this about customer retention. And what I've come to see is that after 3 to 4 years, 5 or 6 years, and a certain level of revenue, 70% of your revenue should come from your existing base. And when you tell some founders that, it's pretty confronting, because they're like, well, what do you mean? They're staying on as customers, but they're just paying me the same old thing. Then it's just like a business, right? Your business is never actually maintaining. It's either expanding or it's contracting. Looking at your customer base is the exact same way. If it's not expanding, it's contracting, right? And
are we sensationalizing the sales role?
I think some places do, but I think it's becoming very aware to a lot of founders now because of data. You mentioned, and this is where your expertise is, they're not really aware of what's going on. The sales is highlighted, and it's the big win, and everyone wants it. Hey, we got this customer. In my opinion, and this is what I coach and train on, is that the real work doesn't start until they become a customer. You know, there's an old saying, nothing matters until something is sold. You know, getting the customer is one thing. They bought into what you were promising, and you built that level of trust. Now, maintaining that trust and keeping that relationship, that's the real work. I've come to see customer success as much important, if not just as important, every bit of sales as there is, because people always look at sales as the cowboys, right?
Yeah.
But if you're doing this right, you have someone that's managing that customer relationship aside from the salespeople. A lot of times I'll go into companies, we talked to a company recently, they had about, under 20 people, a sales force of under 20. And then we said to him, my colleague said to him, well, who's managing the relationship? And the guy said, what do you mean? He's like, I just told you, we've got 20 salespeople. We said, no, who's managing the relationship? If these are the hunters, who are your farmers? Who's maintaining? And they didn't have anybody. And literally, we gave them this education on, hey, here's how important it is to have customer success. Sure enough, not even a week later, we see the same company put an ad in on LinkedIn for their first CSM agent. But if you're not maintaining and building from your base, because listen, the .com era taught us that anybody can, once you're good at getting customers, that's one thing. And so many people bet on those companies that were, 1,000 people are signing up a week or that kind of thing. But then when you take the long tail of that and say, okay, of that 1,000 that signed up in January, in March, how many are still here? And I feel like the tables turn when you started looking at that, because I've had a lot of founders come up to me and say to me, we're onboarding X amount. They throw some massive number on you. I say, okay, of the ones that are onboarding you, how many are still here? Right? That lifetime value becomes very, very important.
The companies that make it are the ones who keep their customers.
100%.
And I think what you're pointing to is how, as you scale your business, you need to be able to go and build a retention model. 100%. And a customer satisfaction model.
Yeah.
And I think this is what I meant about that sensationalization of winning the business versus keeping the business.
Right.
And we have all of these, Bezos at Amazon went and, wrote that customer letter for 20 years. Why everything was around the customer. And it's, I think, almost kind of going and bringing that sense of to oneself in one's organization.
Yeah.
And I think it's a level of like appreciation and humility, which we sometimes don't, I think, emphasize enough. In building companies that is there.
I completely agree, because I think the founders that I think understand the long play, they're really in tune to their existing customer base. So for instance, if you talk to someone, when I buy something off of Amazon, okay, if I'm looking at one product and it's got a 5-star review, but only 20 people have bought it, I'm leery. If I've got something, I'll take a 4.7 or 4.8 that's got 22,000 reviews. If that kind of helps paint the picture, right? Because if you have, let's say, less than 100 customers, right, or 25 clients, you should be intimately aware of what pains they have, right? Because the worst thing you could do is to say, hey, come on in, you're a customer of ours, and and not give them the high-end treatment of making sure that they're not just happy, not just that they're a great onboarding, but initializing that relationship from the very beginning and say, listen, this is a partnership. Because what I've noticed is that there's, just like in management, there's 3 different types of management. There's that command and control, right? Which in sports works. In the military, it works. Hey, I know what to do. I'm going to tell you what to do. You do it, right? And then there's that second level where it's fair trade. Hey, we're going to set you up as a customer, but don't expect us to do too much. Those first 2 don't really pan out in the long run. The one that I've seen work the best is the partnership model, right? To where you're intimately involved, because sales guys will tell you this. The best customer is always an existing customer, right? Because just like when people say, oh, you need to develop your brand and everything, I'm the contrarian and always salespeople. I don't develop my brand. My customer base tells me who I am. They tell us how great we are. They tell us what we're not doing right, because the best customers they're unabashed. They'll be like, hey, listen, you guys do this, but if you did this better, and then if you notice, that's where I think you butt heads with engineering and product types, because product types always say to you, and I learned this when I worked with Johnson & Johnson, because the guys at Johnson & Johnson that were designing the implants that we use, they were all PhDs, they were NASA scientists. And I would say to them, hey, how do I sell this to these doctors in New York City, the most competitive market in the world? And they would say, oh, it's the best product in the world. It sells itself. You can't do that as a salesperson. You've got to go to the audience.
I love what you're saying there.
You know what I mean?
Think that,
you've got to go to the audience.
I think that part is there. You got to go and understand that customer. And I think
Yeah.
what you're talking about is that evolution as you mature, because you go back to look, are these people that are seeking the solution and they're grateful that they found you?
Yeah.
Or are you having to evolve your offering and kind of co-sell or help them co-buy with you?
Right.
And I think that evolution is very dramatic versus you are now the industry standard and people are idiots if they don't come and buy from you,
Right.
because they're missing out on that social equity.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of bring this all to kind of an end that's there, and to kind of wrap up our podcast. And I really appreciate what you've gone and shared.
Sure.
What is something that you have gone and used as a quote, maybe to yourself or in conversations, that has just helped you ground you or helped you realize, like, what are we doing here? Or like, what's the value that you add? What's kind of like that quote that you'd kind of have people reflect on for themselves?
I mean, so we're talking about we're leaning more towards the personal philosophical sense that.
Yes, like one of my favorites, and I probably use it too much these days, is Charlie Munger's, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah.
And it really pauses me in the moment. Is like, what's going on here? I use it in due diligence a lot.
Yeah.
Right? What's something that kind of gives you a bit of a competitive advantage?
I mean, there's a couple. I'm very much in tune to those kind of mantras and sayings and such. I think that before I give you the one sentence, I'll let you know that, I'm a little bit different in the sense that I don't believe in accidents. I don't believe in coincidences, and I hate surprises, right? And I battle with my family all the time because tragically we lost my father to an accident. But again, it's if you dial back on anything that actually happened, if you go back a little bit further, because everyone always looks at what happened and everything after. Somebody didn't do something that they were supposed to do. So the things that I just mentioned, the accidents, coincidences, surprises, selfishly, they tell me that my eye wasn't on the ball. So after going through it, I probably say something very different at 25 than I'm 50 now. And I would say probably, one of the things that I always think of, there's no such thing as random, right? And on top of that, you choose the life you live, right? So when I coach people, like I was telling you before, I focus on a lot of behavior. There's only 2 things we control as human beings, and that's our emotions and our behavior. Everything else is out of our control.
I love that.
So in the context of things, if you realize that you can control how you react to things, how you handle things from the moment they happen on, that's awesome. Up to you. In business, the last thing I'll leave you with, because it's humbling, and it's listen, in business and in life, no matter what, whenever you don't get what you want, it's because of you, not them. That's always helped me in sales as well.
That is a very powerful closing statement. So on that, I have one final request for you, Rob.
Sure.
Who should reach out to you and your colleagues at Achiever Capital and when?
Yeah. Anyone that has a company or that wants to scale, wants to retain what they have and grow what they have. We've been fortunate, like I said, we find that sweet spot into anybody that's product market fit, but that is at a precipice to where they have a great thing going, but it can be better, right? We look for good opportunities that we can make better. Also, private equity companies have contacted us about the same things because we can turn it around fast. And because of AI and software, we can analyze it even quicker than like a 60-day audit. We don't need that. Within a week, we can tell you where we think the cracks are. So anybody that wants to scale their company or is looking to head towards an event, we're the company you want to call.
Rob, thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom today.
Yeah.
And look forward to going and seeing people's responses and reactions to what you shared with them to
Thank you so
anticipate the hard times, not just
That's right.
be excited about the good times.
Edgar,
Thank you,
thank you
Rob.
so much. Thanks for having me.